I wasn't supposed to be there that afternoon. My cousin had dragged me out of the flat because she said I was going gray from the inside, which is her way of saying I needed air. We ended up near St. James's, that stretch of London that always makes you feel like you've wandered into someone else's more important life. The old cream buildings, the iron railings, the hush that sits over everything, even when tourists are clicking photos every 3 seconds. It was a Thursday, February, and one of those days where the cold doesn't bite so much as just lean on you, steady and slow, while the sky goes the color of old dishwater. The kind of day where nothing feels like it should happen. We were standing outside a patisserie on Lanesborough Row. My cousin was deciding whether a custard tart was worth the guilt, as she put it, when I noticed him. The guard. Not one of the ceremonial ones you see outside the palace gates, all bearskin hat and painted expression, though this one was different. Plain clothes, but military straight, if you know what I mean. That posture you can't fake, like someone had poured concrete into his spine at birth and let it cure properly. Dark jacket, earpiece, the kind of shoes that cost nothing but last forever. He was standing outside a townhouse maybe 40 meters up the row, cream-fronted, black door with a brass knocker shaped like a fox's head. Nice, quietly expensive, the kind of address that doesn't advertise itself. Well, what caught my attention wasn't him exactly. It was what he was doing with his hands. He wasn't standing at ease. He was listening, both hands flat against his thighs, head tilted 2 degrees left, eyes tracking the door in front of him the way a dog tracks a sound it hasn't classified yet. Not alarmed, not bored, somewhere sharp and in between. My cousin finally committed to the custard tart and came to stand beside me. "What are you staring at?" she said. "Now that man. He's just security. He's not relaxed." She looked again. "He's fine," she said. But she didn't move either. 30 seconds passed, maybe 40. A couple walked by with a terrier. A black cab rolled slow through the narrow street. The cold leaned harder. Then the man pressed 2 fingers to his ear. And everything after that happened very fast. He moved toward the black door, not running, something faster than running. It's that controlled sprint where the body is all purpose. And raised his right shoulder and hit the door with everything he had. The sound was wrong. That's the first thing. It wasn't a movie crash. It was dense and flat, like a book dropped on stone. And then the frame gave and the door went inward and he was through it and gone before the echo finished. I stood with my mouth open. My cousin dropped her custard tart. "Oh," she said. Just that. "Oh." And the street had gone quiet the way streets go quiet when everyone stops pretending they're not watching. 3 tourists froze mid-photo. A woman in a tan coat pressed herself back against the railing. A man walking his bike just stopped, straddling it, 1 foot on the pavement. We all stood in the cold and waited. What was inside that house? Nobody knew. That was the thing that made your chest go tight. The not knowing. The empty doorway with the light leaking out. The black door hanging crooked on one hinge like a broken jaw. I should tell you who lives there, or who was staying there, because it matters. The townhouse on Lanesborough Row was known, quietly known, the way things in that part of London are known, to be associated with Tom Parker Bowles. Not a permanent residence. More of a borrowed grace, the kind of arrangement that exists in old money circles where the question of ownership is always slightly blurred. Tom uses it sometimes, people said, for dinners, for work, for whatever a man of his particular orbit does in a building like that on a Thursday in February. I didn't know this standing there. I found it out later in pieces, the way you always find these things out. A journalist friend's text message, a brief item buried in an evening news crawl, a phone call from my cousin at 9 that night going, "So that house." But standing on the pavement in the cold with 40 strangers, all holding their breath, all I knew was that a door had been destroyed, and someone very trained had gone through it, and nobody had come back out. The wait was 3 minutes. I know because I looked at my phone when the door went in and then again when the first figure appeared in the threshold. 3 minutes, longer than you'd think, short enough to be terrifying. It wasn't the guard who came out first. It was a woman in a dark suit. Administrative, composed, they moving with that specific civil servant energy that reads as calm, but is really very controlled, fast-thinking. She had a phone pressed to her ear and she was talking, but not loudly. She stepped over the broken frame without looking at it. Then, 2 more figures emerged. Both men, both that same straight-backed professional gravity. They didn't look at the crowd. The crowd looked at them. My cousin grabbed my arm. "Something actually happened," she whispered. "Oi, and that's when the guard came back out. He had a small wooden box tucked under his left arm. He held it carefully, not rigid, but that deliberate hold that means this is the point of all of this. He didn't look at any of us. His face had gone entirely neutral, professional blank. The box was maybe the size of a shoebox, plain, dark wood, no markings I could see from 40 meters. I have thought about that box more than I care to admit. What was in it? I don't know. And nobody on the pavement that day knew. What we knew was this. A door on a quiet street in St. James's had been broken down in under a second by someone who looked like he'd done it before, and 3 minutes later a box had come out, carried like it mattered, like it was the whole reason. And the street had tilted slightly on its axis and then kept going. The tourists went back to their cameras. The woman in the tan coat unclenched herself from the railing. The man with the bike looked down at his handlebars a moment and then pushed on. My cousin bought another custard tart, and I stood there in the cold watching the black door swing on its one good hinge, open to whatever was inside, until a second guard appeared and pulled it almost shut. Not all the way, just almost. Like something in there wasn't finished yet. The woman who lived directly opposite told the journalist, not me, a proper one, who tracked her down 2 days later, that she'd heard it coming. Not the door, before that. She said there had been voices in the hour before, not arguing. Worse than arguing, she said. The way 2 people talk when one of them has stopped believing the conversation is going anywhere. Flat. Controlled. That terrible politeness that isn't polite at all. She had been making tea. She noticed because the window in her kitchen faces the street and she had looked up twice without meaning to. The way you do when something just outside your peripheral attention is wrong in a frequency you can't name yet. The second time she looked, the guard was already at the door. Then the frame gave. She said the sound reached her through the glass and she put her hand over her mouth, not because she was frightened, but because this was her phrase, exactly. It felt like watching someone prove a point. Constance Hadley, 47, retired civil architect, tea going cold on the counter. She is, by all accounts, not a dramatic person. Which is why what she said next matters. She told the journalist that after the guard came back out with the box, she could see more from her window than we could from the street. There was a moment where he stopped on the front step and just stood there. Not long. 4 seconds, maybe 5, looking down at what he was carrying. He looked, she said, like a man who had found something he didn't expect. Not horrified, not satisfied, unsettled. Then he walked to the car and that was it. The box. Let me tell you what I've been able to gather about the box. Not enough, never enough with these things. What the journalist's piece eventually said, obliquely, carefully, buried in the third-to-last paragraph the way real information always is, was that the contents were described by a source as correspondence and materials of a personal and politically sensitive nature. Political. That word landed and kept landing. But Tom Parker Bowles is not a politician. He's a food writer, a well-bred, well-liked man who knows his way around a dinner table and has never, as far as anyone knew, been the sort of person to find himself at the intersection of a broken door and the phrase politically sensitive. which means the box wasn't about him, or not only about him. This is where it gets quieter and more unpleasant. And the circles he moves in, the ones that come with that kind of address in that part of London, those circles are old and tangled in ways that don't announce themselves. Names attached to decisions that were made in rooms where the windows were always tastefully curtained. None of it scandalous on its face. All of it potentially scandalous in aggregate. What was in the correspondence? Who wrote it? To whom? These questions did not get answered that Thursday, or the Thursday after. Here is what I kept thinking about, though. Not the box. The guard's face when he came back out. I'd seen his face when he went in. Pure function, nothing there. The dial turned all the way to task. That's trained. That's a man who has rehearsed himself out of having an expression in the field, but coming back out with the box under his arm? Something had slipped. Not much. Not enough that anyone who glanced once would catch it. But I had been watching the door since the moment it went in, and I was watching when he stepped back over the broken frame. There was something around the eyes. My cousin, when I described it to her that night, said I was projecting, said I'd built a narrative in my head and was filling in faces that matched it. Maybe. But Constance Hadley said it too. He looked like a man who had found something he didn't expect, and she was watching from a different angle. The car left at 12 minutes past 3. I know that because my cousin had her phone out by then and was filming, though she deleted it later because she said it felt wrong, which is how she handles most things that make her feel something she can't categorize. Dark car, nothing on it, clean. It pulled into traffic on Lanesborough Row without urgency. Didn't hurry. That specific unhurriedness that isn't calm, its conclusion. The shape of something that's already been decided. The two of the suited figures got in. The guard stood on the pavement for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the house. Not to go back in, to stand in front of what was left of the door, as if it needed guarding now, as if something had been found in there that changed what the door meant. We watched him for another minute, my cousin and I. The street settled around him, a cyclist passing, a gust shaking the bare trees in the iron planters, and he didn't move. Should we go?" my cousin asked. I thought about Constance Hadley's kettle going cold on the counter, about the 4 seconds on the front step, about a wooden box carried with both the care of someone carrying something that mattered and the look of someone wishing it didn't. "Yeah," I said. We went. But I kept looking back until the row bent and he disappeared from view. Still standing there, still watching the door that no longer quite closed. Keeping in whatever they'd found, or keeping the world out from it. I couldn't tell which. There's a version of this story that gets told cleanly. Guard responds to security concern. Entry made, materials retrieved, no injuries, no further comment. That version exists. It was in the brief official statement. 6 sentences, passive voice throughout, released to exactly 2 outlets on the Friday evening when everyone was already looking at the weekend. Timed for disappearance. I know how these things work. What I can't stop turning over is the gap between those 6 sentences and what I watched happen on a quiet street in St. James's while my cousin mourned her custard tart on the pavement. Official versions are always about what was done. They are never about what was found. The journalist, his name was Aldrich, he freelanced for 2 serious publications and had a face like a man who had given up on sleep around 2011, rang me 4 days after it happened. And he'd found me through someone who'd filmed on their phone. 1 degree of separation. He asked if I'd been there, and I said yes, and he asked me to describe what I'd seen, and I did, as precisely as I could, and he listened and didn't interrupt, and when I finished, there was a pause. "Did you see the box clearly?" he asked. "Not clearly. Dark wood, both hands." "Did anyone else seem to know what was happening? Anyone in the crowd who looked prepared?" I thought about that. "No," I said. Everyone looked the same kind of surprised. He made a small sound that wasn't agreement or disagreement. "What's in the box?" I asked. He paused again. "I'm not able to say that yet." Yet. Not I don't know. Not I can't confirm. Yet. The thing about Tom Parker Bowles is that he is the kind of person whose life has always operated at the margin of history without quite being in it. The king's stepson. A food writer with warmth and genuine talent, and the particular social ease of someone who grew up understanding that certain doors open with a word. Not a villain, not a saint. A person navigating a complicated inheritance, in every sense. But the address on Lanesborough Row, the Thursday afternoon timing, the correspondence described as personally and politically sensitive. And there is a version of this story where the box contained something that mattered enormously to people with far more to lose than Tom Parker Bowles. People whose names appear in correspondence as a matter of operational habit, a signature here, a note there, who would very much prefer that habit to stay theoretical. I don't know that that's what it was. I want to be clear about that. But a door does not get broken down at 2:12 on a February Thursday because someone lost a recipe. An Aldrich's piece ran 3 weeks later. I read it twice at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning. He is a careful writer. The kind of careful that is its own communication, every hedge in place, every phrase chosen for what it permits rather than what it declares. He quoted Constance Hadley. He quoted an unnamed source described as familiar with the relevant institutional interests. He did not quote me, which I was privately relieved about, and the piece described the retrieval as related to materials that had come into the possession of the townhouse's occupant, inadvertently, sources suggest, through a network of personal correspondence stretching back more than a decade. Inadvertently. That word. I read it 3 times. Inadvertently is how people get implicated in things they didn't choose. It's how paper trails form in circles where everyone assumed the conversation was private, informal, off the record. It's how a man who writes about food finds himself at the center of something that requires a broken door and a wooden box, and a guard who comes out looking like what he found was not what he went in expecting. Inadvertently. The whole country, in some ways, runs on inadvertently. I went back to Lanesborough Row once, 3 weeks after, on a different kind of day. The cold had lifted a little, a weak sun making the cream buildings look almost warm. The black door had been replaced, new frame, the same fox head knocker. There was no way to tell standing in front of it that anything had happened there. The street was the same. The patisserie was open. A man was walking a dog. Everything correctly composed. I stood outside for a minute, just to have done it, just to mark it somehow. A woman came out of the house 2 doors down and gave me a look. Not hostile, just the you don't belong here assessment that people in street. Jameses have perfected across generations, and I pulled my coat tighter and turned to go. Before I did, I looked at the new door one more time. Same glossy black, same knocker. But the knocker wasn't straight. The fox's head was tilted a few degrees to the left. Not broken, not damaged, just slightly off. The way things are sometimes when someone's put them back, not quite the way they found them. Trying to restore the look of order. Getting close. Not close enough. My cousin rang that evening to tell me Aldrich's piece had been shared around by someone at one of the broadsheets and was picking up traction. "Does it say what was in the box?" I asked. "No," she said. "Does anything ever?" I thought about the guard on the pavement, 4 seconds on the front step, looking down at what he was carrying. The dial that almost never slips, slipping. I thought about 6 sentences of passive voice timed for disappearance. I thought about a foxhead knocker tilted 2 degrees left on a door that was supposed to look like nothing had ever happened. "No," I said. "Not usually." There was a pause. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah." I wasn't going gray from the inside anymore, at least. I'd just found out what color it was.